Hi, this is Matt Burns from the University of Missouri. One of the things my students talk to me all the time about is they are never sure how to write a discussion section. And the discussion section is a very important part of the manuscript. It's actually the part that many of us sort of enjoy writing the least, but it's actually not that difficult. So I want to do is model for you how to do that. So what I'm going to do first is that we did a meta-analysis. We did a study. I'm not going to get a lot of detail, but we did a study where we looked at the effect of various technology-based interventions on reading comprehension with kids who are learning disabled. And so we found is an overall effect size of 0.4 weighted 0.44, which was significantly greater than 0. And we found a couple things that were interesting, nothing really significant. We only had 17 effects to work with, not a lot of power to do stuff with. Just weren't that many studies since 2000 for kids with learning disabilities that looked at reading comprehension with technology. We found that you can see elementary students had a larger effect, but only 2 studies, and the difference wasn't significant. We found that if it was instruction, like initial instruction, some strategy, etc., 0.53. Now it's smaller than practice, but that's only one study. We really are interested in the text and talk, which was a 0.15. So while those differences isn't significant because the confidence intervals overlapped, and we still feel interesting finding that this was moderate and this was small, not only 4 studies. And then the other interesting finding, assessment didn't matter. Design really mattered. We saw experimental was much larger than quasi-experimental, but again, not a significant difference because the confidence intervals overlapped. But the business as usual condition, if a study compared it to business as usual, so technology-based interventions compared to doing nothing, large effect, 0.75. If it was the same intervention, just not delivered by technology, which 6 effects were that, was 0.33. Now it's twice as large, more than twice as large, but again, not a significant difference. And then a different intervention, actually a negative effect. So using some other intervention that may or may not be technology-based, we didn't look at that. Again, because of the huge effects, huge confidence intervals, it was not a significant difference, but still an interesting finding. That's basically what we found in oversimplified discussion. So now to write the discussion section. Discussion is actually pretty formulaic. It is your chance to say whatever you want. So that's true. It's your chance to explain things, etc. But we generally speaking follow this framework. So number 1, discussion, we summarize the results. So I say the current study meta-analyzed 17 effects from 15 studies, examined technology-based reading comprehension interventions for kids who are SLD in reading. We found a moderate effect, 0.44. We go through and list the age of the students didn't matter. It was larger for elementary age kids and adolescents kids. The type of assessment didn't matter. But we did say that technology-based reading interventions that provide instruction at a moderate effect that was greater than 0, and larger than the effect size for text and talk, which has a small effect, and then interventions compared to BAU condition that led to larger effects than those compared to the intervention, to the same intervention without technology or a different intervention with or without technology. So that's kind of step 1, just summarize your main findings. And that's usually all you need to do. Just 1 quick paragraph, maybe 2 if it's a pretty big study. I've got it was a fairly small study. So we're just going to give our highlights. And I am of the mindset that you'd rather underinterpret than overinterpret. So don't go crazy here. Just state your main findings, and you should state them in relation to your research questions. Okay. Then we put in these headings. We're going to contextualize the data 3 ways. 1, with previous research. 2, with practice, and 3, policy or theory, whatever it is. Now, this one we're not going to go nuts with, so we're probably not going to compare it to any implications for theory or policy. But if you do, you put them there. So the next section we're going to put in, which I probably will have a header, will be to compare it to previous research. Okay, so the first thing we can do is compare to previous research. Okay, contextualize it within previous research. Then we're going to contextualize it within practice. And we usually call that implications for practice. Okay, good. And then, of course, we have limitations. Now, I always brainstorm a few limitations beforehand. So I've got a few limitations brainstorm, which I'll talk about in a minute. Oops. And then conclusion. I never end on limitations, always end with a conclusion. And that's basically it. You've got summarize your main points, compare it to previous research, discuss implications for practice, discuss implications for policy or theory if there are any. There aren't in this one. And then limitations, conclusion. And your limitations can be limitations and directions for future research. So the first thing I'm going to do after I've written my summary paragraph is now I'm going to go back and compare it to previous research. So I'm going to go back up to the introduction, find studies that agree with it, that are consistent with it, inconsistent, and I'm going to just cut and paste those in just for a minute, and then come back and fill in the text. So I'm going to pause the video for just a second. All right, so I've gone through and just cut and pasted a couple points from the introduction. They're the main studies that I want to compare the current results to. So remember, the first paragraph here just simply summarizes the main findings. And now here, compared to previous research, I'll leave this as a heading, but that's not really a heading. I'm going to delete it. So I've gone through and just simply got some main points I want to talk about. And so I will say something like this. The current data were consistent with previous research that also found small to moderate effects of technology-based interventions and reading. There. Moreover, most previous meta-analytic research found 6 to, I think it was 10. 6 to 10 studies, I'll say approximately. I'm not going to say 5. 5 to 10 studies that addressed reading comprehension interventions delivered with technology, and that's going to be, I'll copy that. So I'm going to write this person's name here. Whoops. Oh, technology, okay. Approximately 5 to 10 studies, just reading comprehension delivered with technology, and the current meta-analysis located 15 relevant studies. All right. So again, nice little start here. We also found that this study found something different. I'll talk about that in a second, but this study found that text-to-speech resulted in small to moderate interventions. Okay. Okay, so now I'm going to talk about, it was also consistent with the study that found small effects for text-to-speech. Okay. Previous meta-analysis found small effects for text-to-speech on reading comprehension with, oops, almost identical effect size equals 0.16. What year was that? 2017. Okay, so I said it's consistent with this study. It's consistent with numbers of studies we found. This text to talk was an almost identical effect size. Media led to a larger effect. On small effects for text-to-speech interventions and reading comprehension with almost identical effect size. And oops. And larger effects for multimedia interventions that explicitly taught a reading skill. And this is, 2017. Let's go to Higgins et al. No, yeah. Okay, so now I'll talk about some of the more intricate things. So it's consistent with this. The current study found that the most commonly studied technology-based intervention, so the most commonly studied one was instruction at 11. Yeah, instruction. And that was the average large effect size. Now practice had one, but it had 1.11, but only one study. So the most common one basically had the largest effect. Okay, so I'm gonna go back up there and say that. Technology-based intervention led to to one of the largest effects which was the opposite finding in previous research that concluded the more commonly used interventions were not the most effective. Now you'll see I'm kind of citing this one article a little, kind of a lot right now, so I want to mix it up a little bit more. Okay. So it also found that BAU was the strongest condition. So I want to expand on that a little bit here too. Current study found most commonly cited, it should be somewhere in there. Oh, no, it's okay. Most commonly studied technology-based intervention led to one of the largest effects, which was the opposite finding in previous research that concluded more commonly used interventions were not the most effective. Now I want to say that BEA, the analysis by comparison condition was also inconsistent with previous reading intervention research because the BAU condition led to the largest effect, and a previous meta analysis found that the BAU condition had a smaller effect than with interventions that used an active control group. Oops. Let's say, however, much like, the finding in Gersten et al., comparison condition age of the student and assessment used did not moderate the effects of the reading interventions. Let's say among students in elementary schools. Okay, and that's really it. That's all you need. Comparison to previous research. You don't need a ton. Oh, I might go back and add a few more points. I'm also a big believer that you write the first draft and then you edit it. So I want to get this first idea done. I'll probably come back. Now I'll add in, so now I can go ahead and get rid of this to remind myself to put that in. Just delete it. Okay, I'll go back and read that later for more detail, etc. And lastly, not lastly, but implications for practice. The current study has potential implications for practice, but additional research, is needed. The study suggested, found that technology-based interventions, reading interventions, have potential for students with SLD, have potential to support reading comprehension of students with SLD in reading. Practitioners could consider adopting technology-based reading interventions, especially ones that focus on explicitly teaching reading skills. What I'll probably do this. I'll put cite, remind myself to go find a study that talks about and cited a particular skill that was taught. So I'll go back and say, this study looked at teaching reading comprehension strategies. So I'll probably go back and add that later. But for now, I just want to get my thoughts down. Now, I also might want to say, you could also say there also appeared to be an effect for practice-based interventions, which was also consistent with previous research. And let's see, Heisted and School, 2008, both cite Bill theory and two. Effect for practice-based reading, let's call it reading intervention, which was also consistent with previous research, but there was only one study identified which, oops, I said which up there, so I'm not gonna say which again. Effective practice-based interventions, which was also consistent in previous research, but there's only one study identified. But given that there was only one study identified, included, but given there's only one study included, that appears to be an area in need of additional research. The current, I keep saying the current study, the small effect for text to talk programs, which was also found in previous research, suggests that practitioners should carefully consider the role of that technology. Talk to text may support students reading text, but appears to have little effect on improving comprehension. Okay, that's good. And that's all you need. I would argue your implications for practice should always be short. Keep them really quick. My rule of thumb is I try to have my limitation section longer than my implications for practice section. That's just an exercise. You don't have to do that, but for the most part, that should be the case. Then lastly, limitations. Although the current study has data that could be of interest to practitioners and future researchers, they should be considered within the limitations inherent in the study design. And first one I might say is something like, I don't know if that's true. How many studies were quasi? How many studies were experimental? Oh, tons more. So more than twice were experimental. Okay, so I'll say that. Approximately, there were approximately, oops. Two times as many experimental studies with random assignment than quasi experimental studies. But meta-analytic research often does not control for quality of the study. So we're making no claims that these are good studies. We're just saying this is what the research says. I can say that. We could say we did not evaluate the effect of research design on the data beyond a comparison between groups of experimental and quasi-experimental groups. That's one. We could also say we didn't find very many studies. The search, I'll go ahead and say second. I don't usually like lists in discussion sections, so I generally try and avoid saying first, second, third, all that kind of stuff. So I might here say we also only located 15 total studies from our search process. That which was likely enough studies to meta and analyze the literature, but not enough to examine precise groupings or to have power for analyses like a meta-regression. More specifically, we found few studies that examined practice-based technology. I only had one. What else do I have? Just a couple. Elementary kids. I don't care about the other. Oh, and different intervention. Let's focus on those. That practice-based energy. Just examine practice-based technology. Implemented the study with children in elementary school, or compared the technology-based intervention to a different intervention. More research is also needed. Did I say text? I did say that. That's fine. We can take that out. Finally, we could not examine the effects for different types of SLD because most studies did not identify subtypes, example, reading comprehension or reading fluency. Because it did not identify subtypes and because of the small, relatively small number of studies, including studies. Okay, that's not bad. So we've got a nice little paragraph of limitations. Again, we'll certainly read this over and brainstorm more. Now, my conclusion will probably be something effective. I'm not going to write it right now. I'll start to do some bullet points. You know, it's a moderate effect, has potential. Given COVID is making technology more prevalent, this research is needed, was needed, but additional research is needed. And that's my conclusion. I'll make that whole paragraphs, but that's basically how you do a discussion. You start with a simple, it's very formulaic, it's nothing to be worried about, nothing to stress about. You write an overall summary of what you found in the first paragraph compared to previous research. Now I'm gonna go back and probably pepper more citations in and do a little editing, of course. And then a few more comparisons, two, that's about good. The one paragraph of summary, two of comparisons to previous research, and then a paragraph of implications for practice, a paragraph or two limitations. Don't go crazy in limitation. I also try and avoid surface level limitations. This study could have been conducted with a larger sample. Every study could have been conducted with a larger sample. This study could have been conducted with a more diverse pool. Every study could have found that. It's fine to include that, but don't just do surface level limitations. You've got to really dive into your design. What are some of the limitations of your design and the potential implications on the results? And then a nice conclusion that gives you a positive. I always end mine with saying this has potential, this is a promising finding, but we need more research. And that's essentially how you write a discussion. Nothing to be afraid of, just follow that simple formulaic outline. I didn't include any implications for theory or policy because this meta-analysis didn't really have some, but if they do, you would discuss them here and I would use a heading for that. Hope you enjoyed this. Hope it was helpful. Thank you.